Thanks for joining us. This is The Economy. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. In the office of mine right now is Professor Wong Chin Huat of Sunway University, a keen political scientist, discussing about the discourse of the environment of the political world of Malaysia and how it ties down to the economy quite directly. So Chin Huat, let's talk about some of the ongoings. Yeah, the former economy minister and the former NRES minister left despite final or last minute overtures by the Prime Minister Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar, saying that he approved of their leave. He may not necessarily approve of their decision to resign, but clearly both has indeed left office. Rafizi has not only served notice, but he has gone past that. Nick Nazmi technically is still serving notice up until 3rd July, but generally speaking, the consensus is he has left as well. Yeah. So, first of all, why do you think that Anwar is still thinking about, I guess, leaving the door open for them to come back? Let's talk about that first before anything.
I think that's very natural and smart of Anwar to do so, because PKR today consists of two parts of the base. One is the loyalist establishment base, aligned with Anwar fully. The other one would be those sort of reformists and more idealist base, if you like. If Rafizi and Nick Nazmi were pushed out, then basically the other half would either not come out to vote, or may support third parties or cast their vote in protest in any way. Now, PKR doesn't really have too many safe seats. If the turnout is low, PKR could lose half of its seats.
So we're looking at 31 seats right now. Yeah. Half of that, 15, that 15, might be 16. Gone.
Yeah, that's possible. Because it just depends on where you lose your turnout. Yeah. Right? Now, what it means is that it's pointless to be PKR next president, hoping to be prime minister, if your party is number 6 or number 7 in the parliament. So that's something very real. And therefore, I think both sides, both Anwar and Rafizi, should see their common interest to keep the party together. The only way to do that is to go against Malaysian conventional wisdom, that is, party should be very coherent, united under the top leader, as if like this is the Chinese Communist Party, right? But rather you have to adopt the British way. British major parties are broad church or broad tents. So you have different factions coexisting to the extent that you can be a maverick, dissident government backbenchers, and you'll be tolerated. The best example is Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour Party leader. When he was the government backbencher, a government backbencher under the New Labour for 13 years, he defied his party whip for 428 times. Now that's 34 times a year in average. He was never sacked, he was never denied his candidacy.
This is consistent with the old Labour MP who Nick Nazmi quoted saying that he resigned because he wants to focus on politics a little bit more. Yeah. That man also thought about the same thing, where he became a dissident in his own party.
Yes, exactly.
But collaborative still.
Exactly. And there's another guy too, also from old Labour, Robin Cook, who was the party chairman in the British context. Chairman is just basically party manager. So he's a cabinet member. He resigned to go to the backbench, and he said that I have not been the backbench for so long. I forgot how it looks from here. It's so nice. So that's a lie to say that I disagree with the government. Doesn't mean I want to bring down the government, but I have to take a stand, and therefore I go to the backbench.
Now, how does this rub with the Malaysian electorate? Because we're talking about the compare and contrast here. We're talking about 1,000-year-old democracy versus, I don't know, 1957 minus 2025 kind of democracy.
I think it's actually possible. We have evolved so fast. I mean, in the past, we have 22 years under the same Prime Minister. Then from 2018 to 2022, we have 5 Prime Ministers within 5 years, right? So we can evolve and learn very fast. It is possible. what actually, and this development, if it's steered to the right direction, it can actually solve the problems of this Madani government. The problem with Madani government is that they become, because of the compromises they have to make, so most of the parties have lost their appeal to the distinct base. DAP supporters are not happy with DAP because they're no longer outspoken. UMNO supporters are not happy with UMNO because they think that UMNO would never have a chance to come back atop. PKR supporters felt that you have compromised your idealism for power, right? How do you balance that? Is on one hand, if you are in a coalition government, of course you would have to make compromises. But that doesn't mean that you cannot have other members playing different roles. This is why we need to, from pure self-interest point of view, the government party should actually strengthen the government backbench, allowing the backbenchers to play a different kind of role with the tacit understandings that you are helping us to retain our base. Now, of course, there would be some competition, even personally, between government backbenchers and frontbenchers, because ultimately backbenchers want to replace those in the frontbench, right?
Yeah.
But if people are thinking in the long term, they would be measured in their competition. So, for example, if Rafizi and Nick Nazmi were given a role to play in government backbench, that basically means that you have to expand the number of parliamentary select committees, right? And Nick Nazmi, for example, would probably take over committees on environment, and then Rafizi may take on economy. Now you could do all those, and they would want to show that I'm better than the front bench guy. That's fine, but you wouldn't go too far. You wouldn't promise moon and star like before you were in opposition, because you know one day you get back to front bench, you cannot do all these things will come back to haunt you, right? So I think it's
so the kind of promises will be tempered and the much more realistic.
Exactly, and this is what we need to, because there's a lot of things you cannot. If you are a minister, you cannot say everything you like. This is why that ministers don't get into debate except in answering response from MPs.
Rafizi says this all the time during his political campaign for his political party.
Exactly.
But as backbencher, he's a little bit, not a little bit, a lot more free.
Exactly.
To do so.
Exactly. And what is more important, ultimately, what Rafizi and Nick Nazmi needs is not ministerial posts. What they need is a guarantee that they would not be taken out of their seat, because that traditionally happened. Right? We have very few exceptions. One of them is Tunku Razali. He was never taken out of seats after returning to UMNO. But most cases that if you challenge and your leaders and you lose, you are expected to fade out, or at some point people will take away your seat. Now, PKR need these two guys and people like Wong Chin, because they have that appeal to the more reformist base of PKR and even PH at a wider level.
Strangely enough, these three seats, Pandan, Setiawangsa and Subang, are relative. Subang, of course, very safe. Pandan, I think so too. Setiawangsa is a little bit more dicey, but as safe as it gets, I suppose. So that is the situation right now. Where do you think the reality is going to be when it comes to the likelihood of them working together? I don't know what the mood is between, say, for instance, the personalities-wise, Datuk Sri Anwar versus Datuk Sri Rafizi. Are they able to come to terms with the whole reality of what they're facing today? Do you think that they are better off, they can see that they are better off together as opposed to apart?
I think what they need to do is look beyond the past and look to the future, right? What I mean is not about a peace plan that say, now you have lost, you come under my order. That wouldn't work. I mean, had Rafizi accepted Anwar's appeal to stay on, he would lose his appeal as Rafizi, right? That's not the kind of guy people expected of him. So what it needs to is that both sides need to see very clearly into the future. You're going to face a general elections 3 years down the road.
Is that still 3 years?
Possibly shorter. But even let's say if it's 3 years down the road, it's very likely that your party election would come later.
Yeah, I understand.
Right? Because that you can extend it.
Yeah.
So what's the main point here is that
instead of exactly 3 years from...
you need to win the GE16.
Yeah.
Before talking about who's going to take up as president.
Yeah.
Right? Rafizi, of course, has his ambition. He wants to be the president at some day. He might want to...
Oh, you think so?
I think. Yeah.
Yes, nobody has ever said so, I suppose, except for political scientists.
Especially after now. But I think that go back to one question. It depends not on his ambition, but on Nurul Izzah's performance. I expect Nurul Izzah to be appointed to be the economy minister.
Let's move on to that. So from that discussion, we are now in the lull period where ministers need to be appointed. There could be some serious reshuffling happening, considering that Zafrul is finishing his term at the end of the year, and there are some overtures made by the UMNO president, Datuk Sri Zahid Hamidi, asking for the allocations for UMNO seats in the cabinet to be retained at 7, despite Zafrul leaving. There's also some overtures into the movement of some UMNO key personalities, such as Titi Wangsa MP, Datuk Sri Johari Ghani, and where is he going to be placed next? One would argue that Commodities Minister is very good for him, but may not be to his speed, considering that he is much more high performance than need to be for a commodity minister. So against all of this, where do you see the movement of some of the personalities that have been mentioned, including those that are expected to replace Rafizi and Nick Nazmi? So you were mentioning about Nurul Izzah.
I think Nurul Izzah would likely be appointed as the economy minister, despite her pledge not to join the cabinet. I think that would be necessary for her because she has now got that legitimate positions of being elected.
Does she? Because she is still relative.
It's true. But I think this is a part where we need to put things in perspective. Guan Ying has always been seen as son of Kit Siang when he took over, right? But when he led DAP to win big in 2008, he won his place in the party. He became Lim Guan Ying, not just son of Lim Kit Siang, right? So whenever people talk about it, I think it's quite clear that Nurul Izzah is heading to the top. But whether she could do it or not depends very much on whether she could perform. Now, where else can you perform? You can't perform as technocrats, as the Prime Minister advisor. Now that since you already taken the heat to go into the kitchen, might as well you go all out to be a minister.
What about some rumors that she might go to Selangor?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
But that goes back to whether would Amiruddin be willing to give up his seat.
Is that his choice? After all, he is still a member of the party, and the party president has the...
For Nurul Izzah to go to Selangor, the risk is as high as Tengku Zafrul.
Yeah.
Because you need a by-election.
Okay, let's talk about that as well. So where do you think Tengku Zafrul is going to end up, considering that he has left UMNO and has expressed desire to join PKR? So let's be clear, he has not yet joined.
Yeah.
But the writing is on the wall in terms of him joining anyway.
Yeah.
So where is he going to be heading into?
He has denied that he wanted a by-election, but that's why I thought that was the original plan, whether by him or by other people. So for him to have, if you could get a parliamentary seats, that's easy. If not, then you get a state seats. Of course, that he wouldn't want to be a backbencher or just an exco. He wants to be MB. But Amiruddin is not leaving Selangor because going to the federal cabinet doesn't give you job security. First of all, from the Prime Minister. Second, from election. No one guarantee that PKR would still, or PH would still dominate the next government, right? So he wouldn't want to leave. He want to keep his castle. Now, if anyone want to push Nurul Izzah to go for the states, she would face an even more uphill battle than Zafrul. Because that Amiruddin wouldn't be happy. Now, how can you win? I mean, today Anwar is not as popular as, immediately after the election. even for his base. So you're going to push and to stage another by-election just to install someone you like would not go down well with public opinion. And there was the lesson of Langkah Kajang. Her mother didn't do it. Right? If she wanted a state seat so much, people would question, why didn't you run in 2023 in Penang?
There's some rumor in terms of even the Selangor royalty might not, or Selangor Palace might not necessarily want Aziza. That's a rumor that is, I guess, unproven until today. But just to recap, for those that might not be uninitiated, the 4 vice presidents of PKR, they're all MPs, on top of the fact that 2 out of the 4 are actually adun holders. I mean, Nudin, the MB of Negeri Sembilan, is also the MP for PD, and of course the giant killer, I suppose, MB Selangor, who took head-to-head with Azmin, who, based on their social media, are actually quite friends, despite them going head-to-head in the previous general election. So it's not a problem of them having to sworn in as senators. They can just come in as cabinet members anytime.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So now we're looking at the 2 other folks that are inside the vice presidency. Chang Li Kang, who you think is going to be maintained as the MOSTI minister?
I think he would stay in cabinet. Whether it's keep his own portfolio, that's another question.
And then what about Ramanan?
The expectation now that if you look at the Indian base, they have been quite unhappy with this government over a lot of issues, especially on religion, and to have an Indian full minister, by here I mean like for many Tamil they wouldn't count Gobind Singh as one of their own, right?
Yeah.
So to have a Tamil full minister would probably address that. But of course, in every way that Ramanan feels very much like MIC more than PKR.
Yeah.
That's another question.
Yeah. So now let's talk about some of the thinking behind Zafrul, because we haven't landed on where do you think he will be.
Now, if he cannot go for a by-election, and he has denied that he wanted it now, the best way for him to do is to be appointed as a trade envoy with the ministerial status. So basically all you need to do is to make sure the next minister can work well with him, so you wouldn't end up having a split leadership with 2 heads, right? As long as that part is dealt with, that would be the best way to him. And that change can happen when cabinet reshuffle happen, or he can actually stay on for a while until 2nd of December.
Yeah. So let's talk about then who do you think will replace him as trade minister?
I think the market speculation most likely person would be Jari
Ghani.
Yeah.
The Titiwang's MP.
Yes.
Okay. Then finally, let's take a look into the timeline into all of this. First of all, let's talk about the legality of things. Can a ministry be ministerless for a long period of, even for a short period of time? Is it? What does the law say about that?
No, I don't think there's any particular things on the law. You can always appoint another minister to overlook that.
Like a caretaker minister.
Yeah. So there's no problem at all. It's more about, and also in many cases that you would have to bureaucrats running things on a daily basis. It's just that no one would be able to make important decisions. No driver of major projects, right? But the continued plans can actually go on.
Okay, and then timeline. Where do you think it's all going to happen? Is it 3rd July after Nick Nazmi's notice period ends?
I don't think that Anwar would act on particularly for Nick Nazmi. There's 2 possibilities. One is somewhere before Hari Merdeka.
Oh, okay.
So if he wants to, then
wow, 2 months.
No, before. So I'm saying like any time before that. The reason why I draw that line is like unlikely you're going to have something in between.
Yeah.
Hari Merdeka and then Hari Malaysia.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So if it's going to happen, it could be either June or July, or
so that's one window.
That's one window. The other window that could be actually dragged a little bit later, after Sabah state election,
which is having to be done by October this year.
The Sabah state legislature would stand dissolved by October, which means election would then go all the way December, right? But that's more likely what one speculation is that it would be held, the legislature would be dissolved early, immediately after Hari Malaysia.
That's your reading, I suppose.
That's one of the speculation.
So with these two windows that you have outlined, which is the more likely, in your opinion?
Maybe the earlier one.
The earlier one?
Yeah.
Which is that before Merdeka?
Yeah. And that depends on going back on Sabah, because let's say if GRS strike a deal with the government, that basically you don't have to reflect much on that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to touch the Sabah part.
Yeah.
You just do that. But however, if GRS decide to go head on with the two national bloc in Sabah, PH and BN, that may leave more uncertainty, which means that the Prime Minister can make a decision after the state election.
Okay, let's talk about Sabah politics a little bit more, because considering that maybe not many people would be familiar, you are a Sabahan.
No, I'm not. I'm actually from Perak.
You're from Perak?
I'm Sabahan Aspal.
Oh.
Asli tapi palsu.
Yeah, Aspal. Okay. Let's talk about Sabah right now. So what is the likelihood of GRS striking a deal with PHBN? Because prior to the PKR elections, Datuk Sri Zahid Hamidi of UMNO was talking about how he is actually quite open to talk about anybody, including Warisan. And then, of course, PH is now, after the PKR election, Nurul Izzah is hitting the ground running in Sabah, trying to talk to some of the cabang there, trying to see how they can coalesce and maneuver the political machinery there. Much of it is to the chagrin of Rafizi. He was talking about that is rather disrespectful for the party to do so. At that point in time, he was still deputy president. But politics aside, everybody is making overtures, saying that a lot is on the table, and seems like nothing is off the table. So what is the likelihood of coalitions or relationships and partnerships can be done? What is the likelihood of, say, GRS partnering with PHBN, or just one of them, or both?
Okay, let's go back to the bigger picture. Basically, you have four forces in Sabah. Putting aside PH, which is largely DAP, right, and a bit of PKR, then the other three were brothers from the old UMNO family. UMNO, GRS, and Warisan, right? And what happened in the last state election was that GRS and BN, UMNO, they team up, they split the seats. Now, with now all four blocks are in the federal government, the calculation is this: how can each side maximize the number they contest? For PH, it's almost quite fixed. You're not going much bigger. So it mainly is the other three. So whoever get left out would be in trouble. Right? And then, but they would not even mind completely that a settlements that everyone gets something. That just means they all become very small, which is not bad from Putrajaya's point of view, because it's much easier to control. But of course, these people won't. So ultimately, I think for all this positioning and gesture, it comes down to seat negotiation.
Okay, so...
And there's something in Anwar hands, which is bad from the point of democratic governance is, of course, the video scandal.
Which MACC is still trying to resolve.
Yeah, and we know that MACC have very different speed and pace that can change according to political circumstances.
Okay, the final two areas I want to explore is on voter palatability, the acceptance of voter reaction towards some of these political maneuverings that will happen, I suppose. Nobody wants to talk about it on air, but everybody's talking about it at the coffee shops. This is the thing that frustrates me, right? Especially getting on the record about who goes where and everything, and timeline and stuff like that. And of course, you know, all of this is rather academic. The only person that can determine all this is the Prime Minister. This is how the thing is in Malaysia. Of course, you know, while he plans to decide to do the political maneuvering, he is also reading the ground and how the ground is going to accept most, if not all, of these decisions. That's the first area. Second area is on how this ties down with the economy, because after all, this show is about the economy, investor relations, investor confidence, political risk, and whether or not this is going to be priced into how foreign investments are going to flow in, reaction towards ASEAN, all that macro stuff. Where do you see these two elements coming in against what we have discussed? Say, for instance, that envoy, the trade envoy that you mentioned, that could be Zafrul's way forward. That's not without precedents. We've seen under the Muhyiddin administration how that has happened before and such, and how it is working in tandem with the trade minister and so on. So how does these two elements fall into this picture?
I think for voters, a lot of them, especially Madani supporters, are frustrated because what they get is not what they saw. That frustration, if it were to go further, it would likely result in lower turnout. Not necessarily protest vote. I think protest vote is more likely in the case of Indian than Chinese. Chinese voters are unlikely. Many liberals, liberal Malays probably may also just get frustrated. But some may go for MUDA or PSM. The small party may not make a difference, except that they could split enough votes for the government to lose seats, right? On UMNO part, the frustration is perhaps something, the dilemma of UMNO supporters is perhaps more of like how to get the party back in a running position for top seats, right? That's tough now because like if UMNO were to join the opposition, they will be at the bottom, the third Malay parties.
After PAS and Bersatu.
Exactly. But if they were to stay on forever as peer supporters, junior partner, and given the lesser number of seats that you can run, they wouldn't have a chance to come back.
More of supply and confidence, I suppose.
So the other way around is that ultimately, if the parties are clear-minded enough, they might want to strike a deal. That's something big, not likely to happen yet, but as possibility. You might need to change the system a little bit, so allies can actually compete against each other and then form coalition after election. That's possible by introducing party list seats, as in Thailand. So that's possible. Now come back to if you don't have anything and the government would act as if just like, I'm in power, what can you do? Like in the case of Teo Beng Hock, you throw in no further actions. Ultimately, you might see PAMU, a new party, emerge as, well, not a new party, the party has been here for 2-3 elections, right? Emerge as the largest party, Parti Aku Malah Sundi. People just don't go out to vote. Back to investor sentiment, I think a lot of things here depends on the external factor. Trump, tariff, and then Israel attacks on Iran. All these things would probably disturb us, but putting all these things aside, I think the economy has been relatively well managed. We have seen Malaysia overtaking Thailand in the influx of tourists. We have seen economic growth benefiting from all this uncertainty. But and the government stability, I think, for the short future is not in question, right? No matter what you talk about, I think it is quite unlikely for this government to collapse. And interestingly, this is where you find that PN is a bit in disarray, because the opposition appear to be strong whenever they see a chance that the government can be changed. So that was the case in G15 in the state election. Once that possibility is eliminated, they actually lost a bit of their momentum. And that, of course, you need to give credit to the anti-hopping law put in force in 2022. All these things actually help to keep Anwar in power, but nothing guarantee Anwar or Madani would still be in power after G16. Before G16, I think the economic, political and economic situation are stable.
So, no langkah Sheraton moments. This government is going to stay intact until the next GE.
Yeah.
But once GE is called for, everything is up in the air, and
yes.
we'll see where the coins land.
And those voters who are unhappy, that's the time they can punish any political parties they want.
Okay, final question. KJ, where do you think, is he going to compete with Astro AWANI on the broadcast angle, or is he going to compete with, you know, some of the politicians at the political level?
I think he have a lot of choices. Of course, that we have rumors earlier say that UMNO may welcome him back. That's of course is a possibility. But they also, for me, the larger questions of him returning politics is not if, it's a matter of when. But more importantly is what kind of changes. If he go into UMNO, for example, does it mean that it would help stir UMNO away? Does it mean that it would help to stir UMNO away from being a Najib apologist party, right? Helping UMNO to recapture the Malay middle ground. Or he would actually turn out to be parts of Najib supporters, which is quite unlikely. But if he go in that way, then he will lose his ground. I think the main thing here, given all the political capital he accumulated after keluar sampai sekarang, yeah.
Sampai sekarang,
what would he make of
KSS.
it? Yes.
Right. I don't know whether this is relevant, but I guess my final question would be on Rafi Z, assuming that, you know, things might not work out. Is he going to start his own party? Is that something? That's not a possibility.
Rafi Z is too smart to start his own party because the field is crowded. Given a situation now, without changing the electoral system, any new party go in would just end up contributing deficit to the government coffer, right? So no way. His best chance is actually stay in the party, strike a deal with Anwar, that we go to G16 altogether. You don't kill all my candidates. You leave us a game to play. We won't attack you too far. After elections, then we talk about, you know, what we can do.
Yeah.
Because if Nurul Izzah can deliver,
yeah,
Rafi Z would just accept the fact that, you know, that's not your job.
Yeah.
Right? But if Nurul Izzah cannot deliver,
yeah,
someone else would still come and challenge her.
The viable alternative is ever present and ready.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Chin Huat. That was Professor Wong Chin Huat, political scientist of Sunway University. If you've missed out on any part of this interview, just head on to astro.awani.com, look for The Economy or look for Ibrahim Sani, and you'll find these kind of content there. In the meantime, do stay tuned for the kind of coverages that we're going to bring over at Astro AWANI, because we're going to be bringing much of the conversation to your desktop and mobile devices, and as well as to your TVs. So stay tuned for that. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Catch you in the next one.